Hey everyone, welcome back to Teen TV Deep Dive. I'm your host Alyssa, and here on this podcast, we talk about all things Teen TV. So today we're going to be talking about the show Invincible. It's a little bit different from my other shows that I like, as you guys have seen, like past episodes and past TV shows that we've kind of discussed and talked about. Invincible is a little bit different, but at first I was really skeptical when I first started watching it. Like, am I going to like this? Because I tend to not be a big fan of action movies or TV shows. But I ended up really loving it. And as I was watching it, I was like, I have to make an episode about this because I just had so many thoughts and opinions about it. But yeah. So before we start discussing and deep diving more into it, I wanted to give you guys a little synopsis about the TV show Invincible in case you're not familiar with it. So Invincible is centered around a teenage boy. His name is Mark Grayson, and he lives with his two parents, Debbie, and then his father, Nolan. They live in just a typical suburban town, and nothing's too special to that family from the outside looking in. But Mark's dad, Nolan, is actually a really powerful superhero called Omni-Man. And he has these superhuman level like strengths. He's from this planet called Viltrium, and basically Mark is half human, half Viltrumite. So it's kind of a toss off on whether or not he's gonna get his powers, but he's almost 17. His parents are feeling like it's really late for him to even still hold on to the hope that he's going to get his powers one day. And so they kind of just given up on the fact that Mark is going to continue the superhero legacy that his dad had for him. But it turns out he actually did gain powers, and now his superhero alias is up under the name Invincible. And I will say the action scenes and just like seeing their superpowers on the show is actually quite entertaining. But I wanted to get more into identity and just all the different characters and their emotional struggles and the connections that they have. So Mark is the main character, and as we know, when we're talking about teen TV, there are a lot of more introspective qualities and struggles that we see the characters go through, and a lot of them struggle with identity. I definitely feel like that is a big theme for this show because Mark is already a teenager, and it can be hard enough to just be a young person and navigating who you are within that. But now he's also adding a second like identity onto being a superhero and someone who's handling the responsibility of literally saving the world. And in the later seasons on, we see that he's struggling to save universes, and it's a lot. And we also see as the show continues, um, the emotional baggage and toll that having a father of such importance like Mark has, that it takes a lot on him. And just having that pressure to be as good as your parent, or even just to live up to their high expectations that they may have for you. And he struggles a lot with that. And I see another thing that Mark has difficulty with is just finding his self worth and being somebody outside of Invincible. I think he does struggle with a lot of guilt and just remorse for his actions when he has to fight bad guys, and sometimes it goes too far, or he feels like he could have held himself back more. But I don't feel like that's the case. And when I feel like Mark is just himself and Mark, he struggles to have his own identity, if that makes sense. Because so much of his time and energy is being put into saving the world and just have so many ginormous responsibilities that a lot of teenagers and young adults don't have to deal with. So I feel like there's a gap in Mark and his just whole sense of self. Moving on, I wanted to talk more about Omni-Man and just his impact that he had on his family, as well as him as a character in general. So, as we can see, In the show, Omni-Man was given a mission from his home planet Viltrium to go to Earth. Everyone was assigned a different planet to monitor, and when they were given the green light, they were going to completely destroy that planet because Viltrumites are extremely strong. They're like one of the strongest beings in the whole universe. They were going to basically, when they were given the green light, they were going to destroy the whole planet and basically enslave all the people to then give all of their power and resources to Viltrum because as a whole their species was dying. And so Nolan resided in Earth, and he ended up getting carried away. Like, he was there for a really long time. He ended up meeting Debbie, who became his wife. And then, of course, Mark was born. And he just kind of settled into this role of being a family man and raising his family for a while. But then there were some things that happened. They were like, hey, you've been there for a really long time on Earth. When are you going to finally finish out your mission? Like, the reason that we sent you to Earth was not for you to become a family guy. It wasn't for you to skip off into the sunset and live happily ever after. We sent you here on a mission. When are you going to figure it out? It's almost been 20 years. And so Omni-Man still kind of refuses, but then he eventually ends up leaving planet Earth because some things go down. And when he comes back later on in the show, you see that there's a lot of complexities in his emotions and how he felt on his departure earlier on. I think a part of him is glad to because he was really hard on Mark as his son, but also he just really didn't have a really good relationship with his wife Debbie at the time. So it wasn't like he had that much emotional debt to them to feel like he was so tied to be here on Earth and he couldn't leave when he was in trouble. But I think also after he left and seeing the gap that Mark and Debbie had kind of left in his life, and without them, how empty Nolan felt, he did kind of grow to have remorse for over his actions and also just to miss them like a real father and husband would. And I feel like overall Nolan has this view of that humans are really weak and still in that Viltrumite mindset that we see throughout the show. But it does clash with, I think, how he views Debbie and just the love that he had for her that grew over time because he wanted to be as heartless as he could, like, because that's just the nature of his people. But also seeing Debbie kind of welcome him and all the luggage that he came with, um, and just accepting him with open arms and loving him kind of softened him a little bit in comparison to all the other people that he was surrounded by. So I think that changed Nolan for the better. And I say that with a grain of salt because he's not a stand up guy, but I think it definitely made an impact on him. Nolan also plays a huge factor in Mark's development just as a character and as a child altogether because one, he put so much pressure on Mark when he was a child. I know I keep saying this, but it was very intense with how much pressure Nolan applied to Mark just to be the best that he could be and to try and be even better than Nolan is. And it was a lot for Mark and honestly for Debbie to watch as his mother. But also, Nolan's impact that he's had on Mark's development as Invincible is also really great because we see how Mark has this drive to not be like his dad, not be like his dad. And whether that's in battles and how he fights bad guys, but also in his real life because Mark struggles a lot with feeling like he's not showing enough empathy and not being a good enough person, even when people do him dirty, or even when the bad guys do deserve like the worst of the worst punishments. Mark always has this drawback where he's like, I'm being like my dad. This is going too far. Like, I'm being like my dad right now. And Nolan has just had such a huge impact on Mark, and it's definitely taken a toll on him, but it also gives him that motivation to be better and just drives Mark as a character throughout the show. Next, I wanted to talk about Debbie. She is, of course, like I said, Mark's mom, and she's been a wife to Nolan for over 20 years. And something that I enjoyed about this show is how I think a lot of parents in general, but especially the mom, can get kind of pushed to the side, especially because she's not a superhero herself. We see that Nolan takes a lot of precedence as a character and has a lot more impact on the TV show because he has those powers. He's a superhero. But Debbie, we see her take a role of importance as well, and I just really appreciated that. I like how she had a evolution of sorts because the show did kind of seem like she was going to be on the back burner at first, but as it continues, she's her own independent person with her own storyline and character arcs. And she was really down in the dumps when Nolan had first left Earth, and it was a really dark time, and honestly it was really hard to watch. It made me emotional while watching it, just seeing how much pain that Debbie was in, but seeing her rebuild her life and just be able to come out even stronger than what she was before was really inspiring. And while we see that Nolan creates a lot of turmoil and just a lot of trauma and dark emotions in Mark, we see that Debbie is kind of an emotional anchor for him. Every time that Mark is going through a tough time, whether that be with school, being invincible, or with his relationships, Debbie is there for her son all the steps of the way. And for that, I really respect Debbie, and I think she is a really underrated character on the show because she has so much strength. For her not to be a superhero or for her to not be superhuman, she is so strong. And her emotional strength just surpasses all of the other characters. Now I wanted to talk about friendship, and just how it's portrayed on the show and all the different friendships that Mark has. We see that his best friend is William. I think that William definitely keeps Mark grounded, just to be a normal kid, but also I feel like emotionally. We see that Nolan kind of riles him up. Debbie can kind of coddle him a little bit at times. I won't even hold you. But William's more realistic with Mark to the point where he's like, it's okay to feel how you feel, but sometimes you just have to leave your superhero things at the door. And when you're hanging out with your friends, you can just be Mark. Just be you. Be a normal teenager with the rest of us. Also, I like how Mark has a friendship with this girl, Eve. She's also a superhero. Her name is Atomic Eve. Um, their friendship and just being able to relate to one another is really special. And you can see Mark also taking the role of being more supportive and that shoulder to lean on as Eve kind of goes on her journey of self discovery and she takes a step back from actively being a superhero, which I think was really cool. Now, onto my favorite part. We're going to talk about the romantic relationships that were on Invincible and also the emotional growth that we could kind of see come from that. So, the first relationship that Mark had was with this girl named Amber. She went to his high school. She was a really cool, down to earth girl. She was kind of intimidating to Mark because she just has this really cool vibe to her, and Mark it made him kind of nervous. I thought they were so cute. Just the little banter that they had, and I liked how Amber held him accountable. Like while he was saving the world, she didn't let that slide for him to be a bad boyfriend or to not be putting in effort into their relationship, which I really enjoyed. I think a lot of times the partners of superheroes can kind of get put on the back burner, and their relationship can almost feel like an afterthought because of who they're dating. But I like how Amber tried to make that more of a priority while also still being understanding. But they did have some communication struggles just because of the fact that Mark would have to go like AWOL for days on end, and Amber would just be there and she would just be worried nonstop because Mark can never check in with her. So I think that just made them grow apart. And Amber had to realize that she can't put her life on pause just because Mark has to go off and save the day. And I think Mark also had to grow to accept that Amber can't just pick up right where they left off every time he comes back from a mission just because she's not a superhero as well. So while I did really enjoy them and them being together, I understood why they didn't work out because they were just a little bit too different. I think polar opposites can attract, but I think they were just too different, living two different lives, and for the long run, it didn't work out. After Mark and Amber spent some time apart, there was always this underlying kind of vibe that you felt that Eve had a crush on Mark and vice versa. And that did actually end up growing into a relationship, and honestly a more mature adult relationship than what Mark and Amber had in comparison. I do feel like Eve and Mark's shared experiences made them a more, I don't know how to describe it, but just made them a couple that you could see having more longevity to them because they're both superheroes. They both have powers. They both know what it's like to juggle those two different lives. And a lot of times they could go together and go off and fight and save the day. And so their free time will also align with each other. So I think it's that element of it too that makes them a quote unquote better couple. But in my personal opinion, I still do prefer Mark with Amber. That's just me, but okay. Overall, I really do love the show. I think it has some really cool ways of displaying different emotions, relationships with your parents, and also just character development as a whole, going from like that late teenage years to early adulthood. And I also feel like the action made it interesting too, and that was the element that I normally don't like with shows, but I really learned to appreciate it in this. I would probably say that my favorite character was Amber. I just love her vibe, and she's really down to earth and really honest. And I don't know, she just really resonated with me. So Amber would be my favorite character from the show. But yeah, that's all for today. You guys should stay